Every profession has a role model, and for these convicts, it was the infamous drug lord Pablo Escobar. First up is Beverly Burrell, whose fentanyl-laced heroin operation caused the deaths of 5 people. In Minnesota, several men were buying drugs from Beverly Burrell, including Spencer Johnson, Max Tillier, Luke Rene, Dustin Peltier, and Nicholas Petrick. The 5 men died from overdoses, not knowing that the drugs they had bought from Burrell were laced. Fentanyl-laced drugs can bring the danger to a whole nother level, even leading to death. Not even the prosecutor could believe how brutal Burrell's drug operations were, calling her the most prolific drug dealer they had ever seen.
You've had a front row seat to the kind of battles and misery that addiction causes.
In court, Burrell was facing justice, as well as the grief of families who couldn't handle their sons' deaths.
I think he instinctively knew that if the person responsible for Max's death was held accountable, then someone else might not die.
My mind replays the scene over and over again, multiple times each day, of finding our son unconscious, and then the medical team eventually bringing him down the stairs on a stretcher in a body bag.
Despite the confrontation, Burrell maintained her calmness, giving an admission of guilt and holding her position that she was not a monster.
I am a good person, and I am not a monster.
For the judge, though, she was, as he handed her 23 years in prison for murder.
Again, you have been found guilty of a single count of murder in the 3rd degree. I adjudge you guilty of that offense, and I commit you to the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections for a period of 86 months. That is to say that this is a sentence of an aggregate sentence of 172 months.
The case started a big debate about whether Burrell was really a murderer or not, with several people believing she was. Whether these deaths were on her hands or the fault of the addicts themselves, she will have to ponder behind bars. It seems fentanyl is the new superdrug on the market, with the amount of lives its dealers have been taking recently, like Carlos Hunter. In Lynn, Massachusetts, 37-year-old Joshua Miller had been struggling with painkiller addiction since he was 16. He was trying to get his life together in a sober house, but in 2015, he was found unresponsive. The cause of death? A lethal overdose of fentanyl. It's easy enough to link the drug to its dealer, as phone conversations led back to Carlos Hunter. Hunter apparently wasn't just a small fry dealer, as phone records showed him bragging about the potency of his product. Hunter was following in the steps of Breaking Bad's Walter White, but, just like Heisenberg, he got taken down. The conundrum in court, however, was whether to give Hunter 3 to 5 years of typical involuntary manslaughter or up to 15 years as the prosecution wanted.
He was glib, successful, and actively promoted the drug trade, selling absolute poison.
Joshua Miller's mother made that decision even more difficult, as she touched the hearts of everyone with her breakdown in court and in interviews.
Carlos Hunter took my son's life from him, from myself, from my boys, and his children. That hopefully one more family won't lose a child, a father, a brother to this.
Eventually, Hunter was charged with manslaughter and given 8 to 10 years behind bars. It seems some names are fated to be linked with crime, like that of Benjamin Bundy. It's a rare sight to see a drug lord break down in tears in court, but Benjamin Bundy couldn't take the guilt of his own actions. In New Hampshire, Bundy's drug operations led to the deaths of Matthew Nichols and Bundy's own girlfriend, Jennifer Azara.
I would submit that this case really is, in fact, a dismal testament to where all of this ultimately leads.
Bundy proved to be one in a million criminals who have a conscience, as he immediately admitted everything and took a plea deal. Bundy might have taken the plea deal to skip over the harsher parts of the justice system, but he couldn't escape his victims' families, who gave heartbreaking statements in court.
The life that Matt gave to me is gone.
Time changes nothing. I miss her as much today as I did the day she died.
Bundy tried to keep it together as long as possible when his victims' families were on stage, but at one point, even a hardened drug dealer couldn't control his emotions. Bundy burst into tears, dropping his entire armor and showing even a criminal who one might think deserves no mercy can be vulnerable. Bundy ultimately received 15 years behind bars, but one unexpected wholesome moment was Jennifer Azara's father, who gave Bundy hope that he might have a second chance after serving his penance.
But 15 years, you get a second chance. I hope you use it wisely.
Unlike Bundy, though, Joseph Stilletano refused a plea deal and decided to battle the justice system. In Tampa, Florida, 29-year-old Joshua Sutphin was suddenly unreachable.
I didn't know what was going on. I called 911.
His fiancée got exceedingly worried, but when she came home, she had the brutal shock of a lifetime. Joshua was on the kitchen floor, dead. Joshua had overdosed, and his fiancée revealed that he had a drug addiction problem. But the heartbreaking fact is that apparently, Joshua was in treatment and had completed his program just 1 day before he passed. The autopsy revealed he had overdosed on heroin and fentanyl. But where exactly did they come from? A red dice pattern was enough to blow the whole case wide open with the arrest of Joseph Stilletano. In Joshua's trash, small drug baggies with a red dice pattern were found. Not long after Joshua was found dead, Joseph Stilletano was pulled over, conveniently driving Joshua's car. In his pockets, the police found the same baggies with the red dice pattern.
Those tiny baggies had a red dice pattern. The same red dice pattern that are found in the trash can of Josh and Christy's home.
Anyone with a rational mind would instantly assume Stilletano was the one who provided the drugs, but Stilletano and the defense argued otherwise. Stilletano refused a plea deal, and the defense's argument hangs on the fact that Joshua was in contact with another drug dealer before his death.
There was evidence of other drug transactions prior to the date of the overdose.
The jury did not buy that argument, though, and sentenced Stilletano to 12 years behind bars for manslaughter.
Did unlawfully and feloniously kill a human being, to wit, Joshua Sutphin, which resulted from the unlawful distribution by Joseph Michael Stilletano Jr.
While these drug dealers sold locally, Charles Crossley was a real-life Escobar-esque drug lord. Charles Crossley, aka Rome, stood in court looking terrifying after years upon years of rotting the streets of New Richmond with his drugs. After moving from Cincinnati to New Richmond, Crossley started a drug empire akin to movie villains, but he flew under the radar for years until overdose deaths became prevalent in New Richmond.
During the time that he was in New Richmond, we were experiencing an increase in OD runs and deaths on heroin, sometimes 2 and 3 a day.
When the police opened up their investigations, several cases pointed to Crossley and his operations of heroin, fentanyl, and cocaine. Crossley was like Marvel's Kingpin, ripped straight from the comic book pages. He used small, local dealers and forced them to sell his product, going as far as beating them. Several of these dealers were under investigation and pointed to Crossley, and an informant even tried buying drugs from him to seal Crossley's fate.
Heroin is bad enough, but laced with fentanyl, it becomes a game of Russian roulette. And individuals like Charles Crossley provide the weapon, they provide the bullet, and they spin the chamber, pointing it at the addict's head, and all the addict has to do is pull the trigger. That's who Charles Crossley is.
In court, Crossley knew what was coming to him, so he kept quiet. His silence and demeanor were horrifying, knowing what that man was capable of. During the trial, the chief of police even described how they found Crossley's busted-up dealers.
They would have black eyes, or their face would be swollen, and I would ask them, how did this occur? And they would frankly tell me that Rome, Charles Crossley, and his associates would beat them.
Just like the real-life Rome, Crossley got his downfall in the form of 20 years and 9 months in prison.
Every day that he's locked up is one day that New Richmond, Clermont County is a little bit safer.
Drugs lead to genuine terror stories, but they can also lead to heartbreaking tragedy, just like what occurred at the hands of Aaron Andrade. In Providence, Rhode Island, Aaron Andrade's drug operations led not only to reverting to drugs, but also the death of Kristen Coutu. Coutu was a drug addict. She had been in rehab in 2015 and had officially kicked the habit, but getting over her drug addiction caused her to feel heroic, as she dated another addict, hoping to help him. The relationship backfired, and Coutu ended up buying drugs from Aaron Andrade, who mainly dealt in heroin, or diesel as it's known on the streets. Unfortunately, Coutu couldn't handle the potency of something that was nearly 100% fentanyl, and she died almost immediately.
The state would have proven that what the defendant really sold Kristen Coutu was nearly pure fentanyl, a controlled substance like heroin or morphine, hundreds of times more toxic than heroin.
So are all of these facts true?
Yes, ma'am.
Aaron Andrade went to court for second-degree murder, but he had the nerve to plead not guilty, likely citing the paradox of the gun, not the shooter scenario. After some time, though, he entered a no-contest plea where he had to accept his conviction. Worse than prison time, though, he had to face his victim's family, who could barely hold it together in court.
There were 2 Cranston police officers standing there. All I could say repeatedly was, "Please don't tell me my daughter is dead. Please don't tell me my daughter is dead.
Guilt must have struck Andrade at one point, though, and he showed remorse, even apologizing to Coutu's family.
The actions that I did that day, I never meant to hurt nobody. And I know I hurt a lot of people, including her family and my family, because we're all going through this.
Coutu's mother seemed to appreciate the sentiment.
It does make me feel a little bit better that he has that remorse and that he feels sorry for what he did.
And maybe Andrade could apologize face-to-face after serving his 40-year sentence. Not all parents are so appreciative, however. Some want full-on vengeance against their child's killer, like Jesse Cruz. In Spring Hill, Tennessee, Jesse Cruz was arrested while in rehab for the death of 18-year-old Hannah Hick, whom he sold heroin laced with fentanyl. Her father believes the fentanyl part made the crime murder, not just a drug charge. Hicks's father was relentless on Cruz, wanting him to get the maximum sentence.
The Bible tells us to forgive. I'm trying, but I'm not there yet.
Cruz was charged with second-degree murder, reckless homicide, and the sale of 1 or 2 narcotics. One stunt by his attorney, though, sealed his fate, when Cruz pleaded not guilty, but his attorney set a press release saying he had taken a plea deal. This angered the judge, who rejected the plea and ended up giving Cruz 14 years behind bars.
A press release about a case involving horrendous facts of someone selling fentanyl-laced heroin, who obviously this girl has a family. And apparently no thought was given to the impact of that press release on the family.